Welcome back to the channel. My name is Adam Smith, and today we continue the showcase for Primal: The Awakening coming from Reggie Games. If you haven't checked out my prior play, it was in prototype form at that point in time. I'll have it in the top right hand corner so you can check it out. But in the meantime, this showcase is going to replace that play to show you how things flow and operate with the final version of the game. Now, recently I released an unboxing for Primal: The Awakening. I've also released a how to setup video to show you how to get this monster set up for the encounter mode of play. Primal: The Awakening has two modes of major play, whether it's expedition mode for a one-shot against any boss you wish, customizable options for your hunters depending on the levels you are going to go into it with. You can also go down a campaign road as well, but this will focus on that expedition. We've set everything up from that prior video, which if you want to check it out, and I definitely recommend you do, to get an idea as to how all this got to the table, it'll be in the top right-hand corner right now as well. At this point, we're ready to dive into gameplay. I'm using two hunters that I didn't use in my prior prototype plays. You get to see two different hunters go at it with different strategies. Of course, each hunter being unique and having different ways to affect the battlefield. So we're going to dive into it with these two individuals. I'm going to be actually referring to them as LJ and Theo, just to shorten their names. And we're going to continue on at this point with the win and loss conditions to find out exactly how we can win this game and also how we can lose it. Within Primal: The Awakening, a successful outcome is when we reduce the monster's health down to 0. The second we do this on the tracker, which is right on the monster's dashboard, if it gets down to that 0 position, we immediately win. Sounds pretty straightforward for the win condition, but I'll tell you there's lots of wrenches being thrown as you're going through gameplay. Now, in terms of the failure side of the equation, the players, or player in my case, can lose in two different ways. One is if a player is KO'd and there are no other players standing. So in other words, for me, playing solo, I got two characters. If both of them are KO'd, that is going to result in a loss. The second way that the hunters can lose is if the round marker moves all the way down to that 10th position. Once the 10th round is over, that's all the time you get to try and take on the monster. And at this point, it's assumed thematically that the monster has basically dragged it on so long, you are not going to be able to pull off a victory and you are defeated. Now, before we dive into the very first round of play, have to mention this because I love seeing it in games, and that is a very nice reference card showing the round structure. Very good to have, especially when you're learning the game. I've got it here just as a reference. We're going to go through all this. The very first round will go a bit slow just so I can get you through how the round flows if you've never seen this game in action. Then we'll pick up the speed, lose the card as we move through the rounds much quicker. It's also worth mentioning there are reference cards for each of the hunters, and they are double-sided. They have keywords and abilities listed out, which is very handy. You want to keep those close to your player dashboard at all times. When a new round begins, we trigger any start of round effects, and we currently have one right here on a peril card which is connected to the monster. There's actually two peril cards set up for this monster as they both show stance number 1, and that's the stance you begin the monster at. So we have to deal with both of them, and what's even more fun is that they're both permanent, so when we change from stance 1, meaning this card goes away, and I'll talk more about how that happens, into stance 2, the card below it, these things are going to stick around. These perils are going to be there. So this one's going to trigger at the start of a round, this one's going to trigger at the end of the round, so this is the one that matters at this moment. And the card states, at the beginning of every round, we're going to be drawing a card from the Rumble deck. The Rumble card is going to tell you marked sectors. There are 4 on the actual battle board itself, and to know the orientation of things, this little notch in the middle here tells you that the head is right here. So this is the head at the south area. The north area is the back of the monster, so the front and the back are marked. With the Rumble card now drawn, we have finished up the start of round effects. We have nothing else we need to do at this point in time, but I do want to touch on the stance card because this is really important as it ties into the combat board itself, as well as the wounds that you're trying to get in order to take the monster down and win the game, which is that track up in the top right-hand corner of the dashboard. So, taking a look at the stance card here, we have a number of different pieces of information. First off, we have the aggression level in the top left, more important during setup, so we'll pass through this right now and head down to toughness. Now, toughness is set at 7 here for stance 1, but it's times the number of hunters you have in play. So in this case, 14 damage is necessary in stance 1 to inflict 1 wound on the track above up here. So we have a lot of work to do in order to get that 1 wound to move this thing down the track. And again, we can then continue to progress it. As we go through the stances, that value can change, or it might stay the same. We'll find out as we go. So how do these stances change over time? Well, this card will be exchanged out with stance 2 the second that we hit the track up here on the wounds at 7. The moment we do this, we flip this card off to stance number 2, and new surprises await. Now, the damage that this enemy is dealing to us when it goes ahead and does its attacks will be down here in the bottom right-hand corner. Of course, game effects can add on top of this, but it's a 1 in this case. That could increase through the stances as we go. And then we have the actual combat board broken down into 4 different sections. Whenever you see red in these sections, it means we can use our red cards to inflict combat damage against the enemy on any side. If we happen to see one of these sections blacked out, or maybe multiple blacked out, we then cannot essentially attack that side of the monster, meaning they're protecting themselves thematically. So we have our work cut out for us. There's also another card we'll quickly touch on. That is the objective card right here called Hit the Horn. And in this case, this one is permanent. It'll be sticking around. And if we get a sequence of cards when using one of the hunters that has blue, red, and red in a row left to right, then if you are in the front sector, you can inflict blind. So heading into the consume step, which you can see right at the top of the round structure, we'll go through all of these as I mentioned. Consume is simple. Take a look at both of your hunters and you're able to, if you wish, to use one consumable at this point in time. Again, we don't really know what we have, so we'll just go over them at a high level here. For LJ, we have a healing potion essentially. This one allows us to heal 2. And if we actually have the current attrition level, which is coming from a deck of cards from the monster, which we'll see later on, it's way up here in the top left-hand corner. If it happens to be at a 1 or less, then we can actually heal 4. So we kind of want to wait timing wise for the best time to use that. This one here has an interesting one. It's suffering damage equal to your weapon level to draw 2. So suffering damage equal to your weapon level would be level 1. So 1 damage to draw 2 cards. Could be beneficial in a situation where you want to pull off a really big turn. Then over here we have Hatrox, and this one is a consumable, suffer damage equal to your weapon level. Again, your weapon gets +3 damage until the end of this round. Now you might be wondering why everything references these weapon levels, because the game is structured in a way that you can have higher tiers of levels across your weapons, and that means that the damage is going to be multiplied by that level as you go along. So in my case, it'll always be multiplied by 1, so everything will remain the exact same it is currently, but once you get to level 2 and above, those things start to really exponentially increase. Over here with Thoreg, we have 2 consumables, which are exactly the same as LJ's, but this one's different. You can consume this one to discard a card from your hand. Your hand is right here in this case. To search your deck for defensive cards, so looking for something that is either yellow or green, those cards are defensive, red and blue are offensive, and then add it to your hand, then shuffle your deck. So that hopefully gives you an idea as to the color differences between offense and defense, as well as how we could potentially use an explosive in the future to deal some damage. Pretty cool. But in the consume step, we cannot do this. We can only look at these, and as of right now, I don't plan on consuming anything. We now head into the monster upkeep phase, which is simply looking at the behavior cards we have on the monster dashboard itself. You're going to see 3 cards. There's varying icons on them. Sometimes they can be the same, but in most cases they'll be different. You'll see icons in the bottom left-hand corner for numbers. At this point, the upkeep phase simply has us discarding the lowest value card of the 3 and replacing it with the top card from the behavior deck. Now there's also icons on these cards, and these icons you have to be aware of, whether they're the basic icons which are found in the rulebook at the prologue section or near the comprehensive list towards the end of the rulebook. You'll see all the icons and what they all do. In this case, this one here is going to flip over and trigger when we play an aggro-based card into our sequence. An aggro-based card is a card which has the same matching icon, the top right-hand corner. If we play a card like this into our sequence, that is going to trigger this card behaviorally from the monster itself, flipping it over, and we have to resolve it. We have another one over here. This one has an X through cards, which basically means if one of your hunters goes through all of their hand of cards, that one is going to flip over. And this one, the exclamation mark on the far right-hand side, is actually quite interesting because it's going to go ahead and flip over the second it moves into one of these behavior slots, which it just did. This behavior card is called Lightning, and it states that Ozew is going to gain struggle, and the equation there is going to be the number of characters, which is 2 minus 1. So it's going to be 1 struggle being placed on the stance card. Now, struggle is something you're going to want to try and manage if you can, but it's not good for the hunters. Essentially, the struggle of the combat itself is going to accumulate over time, and the monster is going to use those tokens at its discretion to pay for powerful attacks and abilities that will likely come off of these behavior cards and other game effects. So you definitely want to try and keep these numbers down if you can control them. That was not very good in my case right off the get-go. The next one says the aggro player is going to suffer damage. That damage icon is what we talked about, which is currently sitting on the stance card in the bottom right-hand corner. So 1 damage, but they can reveal a green card from their hand, essentially a defensive card, in order to negate this even happened. LJ is the aggro character currently from the start of the game and has a green card. I simply reveal to show that I have this, and I negate the damage. Right out of the gates, Ozew tried to pull a fast one on us and try to get some damage onto LJ. Was not able to do so. So at this point, we resolved this behavior card. We can discard this one, and we replenish it. That resolves the behavior card. We've discarded the card we resolved, and we've replenished the slot that was open. We're now good to go. Now, that was a simplistic behavior card resolution. There is a little bit of a tougher one, which you will see in the future now that we have a rampage icon in the mix. We'll talk about how that changes things up later on. So we did our behavior refresh, which again normally would just be refreshing one card out and going on to the next step, but we happened to actually trigger something and had to go through a full behavior card resolve. Now we move to the second step, which is the monster gaining struggle tokens based on the number of hunters. So in this case, 2 hunters in play, so 2 more struggle, jumping this from a 1 to a 3. So we've gone through the consume step, the monster upkeep step, and we're now into the player turn. This is where the meat of the gameplay happens during the round for our side of the equation. And we take a look at the character with the aggro token. They're going to take the first player token. So in this case, it will be LJ based on setup because I chose LJ to have the aggro. So the first player token going to LJ. LJ begins the turn. The first thing we can do is start of turn triggers. If we happen to have any, we resolve them in priority level. We don't currently have any to talk about, so I'll skip right past that for now, but it's worth taking a look at those priority levels to find out what they are in the rulebook. I will talk about them if we run into them going forward. We now move into, well, the movement itself. At this point in time, we can generate and pay stamina to move to an adjacent sector, and we get to remove a threatened token if we happen to have one. This is a way to ensure that things don't get worse for us. A threatened token, which I'll show you in a moment, is something that will go on your board if you decide not to move on your turn. So for example, if I decided right now to not move, I would gain a threatened token. And if I do this, the downside of this is when we get to the attrition step for the monster, which is drawing off a deck of cards, which is currently off screen way up top left, it's going to be 2 cards being drawn off the top, and we take the worst result rather than just the standard 1 card draw and you get what you get. So in other words, the chances of bad things happening increase for you if you're in a threatened position, and that is standing still consistently. So you want to be moving around and moving around strategically. So LJ is currently in the front sector of our enemy, which is actually good for our objective card, which is actually sitting off the left. Remember, if it's a sequence of blue, red, red, we can actually blind this creature. Again, we'll talk more about that later on when I can actually pull it off, but essentially that wouldn't be bad, except I don't have the cards currently to pull that off. At the moment, I have 1 blue, 2 green, a yellow, and a red. Remembering again, offensive cards are blue and red, defensive cards are green and yellow. Now, strategy-wise, there's something with the combat board setup which you should definitely know, and that is there are environmental features which provide benefits to you. Sometimes they're kind of an always-on situation, and other times you can choose to interact with them as you wish. So we have 2 down here. Bathanis, these ones in these sectors, if we start our turn with a hunter in one of those 2 sectors, we can heal based on our weapon level. In this case, it's 1, so we can heal 1 damage away. So when LJ is trying to decide where to move or if to move during this turn, the things you want to keep in mind are, number 1, the stance card. We talked about this before, but it's all red currently on the stance card, which means we can hit this thing from any sector right now, which is good news for us. That sounds great. But there is that rumble card, and the rumble card tells us that the front section of the monster and the back section of the monster are considered marked spaces, which means bad things are going to happen in those sections later on. So we want to try and avoid those. Currently, going to the side would be a better idea. Now, something else to keep in mind strategically is the environment itself. Each of the sectors has an environmental piece inside of it right now. We have 2 Bathanis, which is this right here and this right here. If we happen to have a hunter start a turn in either of these sectors, which technically both of our characters are going to start in this sector right here, but we're on LJ's turn right now, so LJ gets this benefit. We can choose to heal 1 damage per weapon level. Well, guess what? We don't have any damage, so it doesn't matter anyway, but it's nice to know we can go to these sectors to get some healing. What we don't want to do is sit still in these sectors for too long round over round, because that's when the threatened token comes in. That's when you're drawing more attrition cards later on, making the outcomes worse for you and potentially having damage coming your way. It makes it much harder to avoid that damage. Now, In a situation around attrition damage that actually comes towards you, and you'll learn a lot more about attrition and how it all works later on, let's say you're getting some attrition damage. If you're in a sector with those rocks up there in the north and the east sector, you can actually use one of the rocks to negate all the attrition damage, which is pretty awesome. So strategically, you want to think about the right windows to use those rocks, because once they're used, they are destroyed and the sector becomes just basically an empty area. Now here's an up-close look at my hand of cards for LJ. We have offensive cards like blue and red. You'll see the symbols match. And then we have defensive cards that look like this, yellow and green. Now we have lots of defense right now, a little less on the offensive side of the equation, but a card can be used, discarded, in order to gain us a stamina. So for instance, if we wanted to move, which is the very first thing we have to consider right now before we dive into playing any cards, is we'd have to actually spend a stamina to move. If we choose to move, we can only move to an adjacent sector. So I know one of the sectors I'd probably want to be inside of is probably where the healing is. So let's go ahead and we're going to toss one of these cards in order to pay for it, and I'm going to make sure it's one of the ones with just a single stamina on it. In the end, I actually chose to use my 2 stamina yellow card. I discarded it, but I only need the 1 because I'm just going to be moving from here to this sector right here. LJ is now in position, has completed the move phase of the player turn, the very first major thing to decide. And because we chose to move, no threat token being placed on LJ, which is great news. And as I mentioned before, I did use a card that had 2 stamina on it, but any stamina that isn't used when you're using it doesn't get kept. It is lost. So even though it shows 2, it's gone. We now move on to the action phase. We have a number of things we can do in here. We can either play action cards from our hand. We have 4 cards to look at right now. We can activate a card ability with the keyword action on it, which we currently don't have any of those at this moment, but might have something like that in the future. Or we can choose to revive if we have someone that's KO'd and downed. Now I've got a couple cards in hand that I think are going to come in useful now that I'm not in a marked territory. In other words, it doesn't match a territory based on the rumble card. You can see here, I'm no longer in the front position or the back position, which is a good spot to be in. I'm on the side. I now don't need to hold on to 2 green cards like I would need to at the end of the round, because there's a peril card here, which is a permanent one that says at the end of the round, each player in a marked sector is going to suffer damage, which is the 1 on the actual stance card plus 2, which means, it's times 2, so it'd be 2 damage unless they reveal 2 green cards. So if I wanted to stay in a marked sector, being the front-facing sector or the one to the rear of the monster, then I'd have to make sure I keep some green cards in hand to avoid this nasty effect at the end of the round. But because I'm on the side, I have a little bit more freedom here to use my green one. So I'm going to go ahead right now. I'm going to choose to discard this card right here. In order to pay, it says when you discard this card from your hand, draw 1, in order to pay for this card. So I'm placing this one into my sequence here, and by doing so, it allows me to draw 1, but it costs 1 to do it. So to pay for this, I'm discarding this card, and when you discard the card, I get to draw 1. So it's kind of a combo, allowing me to draw 2 cards. Got myself an agility card here and an attack plan to add into the pile. Now, something worth noting, but there's no gameplay effect happening for it anyway, is up here in the top right-hand corner, this aggro symbol is here, but it's not red. If it is red when you play a card into your sequence, then the aggro token would move from wherever it is to the character. So in this case, the aggro is already on LJ, so nothing will move even if I play something that does have aggro colored in, but it's worth noting that that is how things will switch based on characters being aggressive. Certain cards, especially red ones, will have that typically in the top right-hand corner, and this is really just telling you whether or not what you're doing is stealthy or being extremely aggressive. Now, green and yellow cards being defensive cards are very good to be in your sequence, because later when we pull for attrition cards, they're going to help to avoid attrition damage. The more defensive cards we have in our sequence, which have this icon right here in the middle, the better. But we also don't want to focus on just burning cards for the sake of having too much defense, but it's good to get some in there. I'm going to choose to place this card in my sequence. This one is not going to be beneficial for the assist, which is a keyword that allows me to discard this card from my hand or to assist another hunter with a benefit later on. We'll talk more about that when I actually choose to do it. The other part of this card says, while this card's at the top of your discard pile, there's a benefit, but it's not going to be. It's going to be part of my sequence. It will eventually get discarded to my discard pile when the sequence is cleared up, and it's going to be cleared up in a specific way. But strategy is there in terms of getting this thing on top of the discard pile to make use of additional damage, which is a plus. Now we're going to go ahead, and this one is 0 cost, no aggro whatsoever on it. Again, not making much of a difference being that I already have the aggro. I'm going to go ahead and do this one over here for another 0 cost. Now you might be wondering, well, what am I doing with this? Well, putting 2 cards in a row like this, yellow and red, means I've just gone ahead and triggered my mastery card, which is a shield master card. It says if I have a yellow and red in my sequence, I can place a counter on this card. So I'm working my way up. I need to get 3 counters on the Shield Master card to flip it over and have it focused, and that will give me benefits, and you'll see that later on. Now, the red card I have played is an attack card, so that's going to do an attack, and because I'm going to attack from all 4 sectors, I can absolutely attack from where I'm currently sitting, and it's going to be based on the damage of my weapon, and when I take a look at my weapon, that damage is going to be 4. You'll see the damage of the weapon that you're using in the bottom section of the card. It's a 4 in this case. You might be wondering about the ability on this card. I'll just mention it quickly. It won't relate right now. This is a retaliate one, and it allows me, if I show a yellow card in my hand when I'm getting damage dealt to me, then I can place a counter on this card. And then if I get those 3 things in a sequence, which I'm actually 1 away from, I need 1 more red card, then I can deal 1 damage for each counter on this card, then discard all the counters from the card. So you can kind of build it up in order to dole out some damage. The red card in my sequence has a 4 damage attack going against the enemy, which I placed here. We need 14 damage to get a single wound, so we have a lot of work to do there. It does state on the card here you may suffer damage, and if you do, choose a player to recycle up to 2 cards. I don't plan on doing this. I don't want to take any damage at this point in time, but it could be a cool effect later on. Now, the second I went ahead and played this, it does have the aggro up here in the top right-hand corner, and although I already have the aggro token, there is a behavior card that is going to trigger the second I'm done resolving this card, which I've just done, so we have to flip this one over. This behavior card is called Surge. At the bottom, there's some flavor text making it sound very bad as to what's happening here, and then Ozew is going to get a +1 damage until the end of this turn. As part of this behavior card resolution, remember I said there's a 3-step process. We're going to activate the card we activated, but then right afterwards, we're going to take a look for any rampage icons. Well, guess what? We have one in the row right now, so this is flipping over. We're going to find out what it does. This is called Chained Lightning. It says the aggro player, which is going to be LJ, is going to recycle a random card from their hand. All other players must recycle a card of that same color from their hand. I currently have 2 cards in my hand, so I'm going to go ahead and randomly do this. We're not going to look at whatsoever to find out what I'm going to be getting rid of, so we're flipping them over. I'll just go ahead and mix them up as I talk to you, and we're going to take the top one, and it's going to get recycled. We're going to go ahead and flip it over to see what it is. It is a blue one, so this is what needs to be recycled. A blue card needs to be recycled from Thoreg, but this one is going to go in my discard pile. Recycling means discard 1 card, and then go ahead and draw another. It might tell you to do this more than once or for multiple cards if it says a recycle 3, for instance, but this is just a regular recycle. We got Shield Strike, not a bad one to get in hand. This is what we have left. We currently have 2 blue cards in hand, so we'll go ahead and flip them over and we'll shuffle them up without looking. And in this case, we're just going to go ahead and discard one of the ones off the top. It's Exhausting Strike. That one is going to be tossed, and we draw a brand new one. It's going to be red, and we've got these 2 along with these other 3. That's going to do it for the Rampage card. It's also worth mentioning, I've just kind of rejigged things that are sitting on the left-hand side and right-hand side of both of my characters to just align things a little bit easier for myself during gameplay. So we discard and replenish. This one will be discarded and replenished. This one will just stay face up for now until the end of the turn. Then it will be removed and a new one will come in. I've also flipped over the discard pile, which is above, just to make it more obvious that those are the ones that are being discarded. This is the deck I'm drawing from over here on the far left, and the new card that came in has the red icon on it, so if we put a red card into our sequence, that is going to trigger this one. If we happen to run out of cards in our hand, that's going to trigger this one. I'm going to end off the player turn for LJ. I could, of course, choose to continue spending more cards if I wish, but there is a benefit to not doing so. If you have 2 or more cards in your hand, when you end your player turn off, you gain a stamina token, which will certainly come in handy to pay the cost of stamina for potentially movement or cards in the future. Now, something that would actually trigger just moments before I took that stamina token to end off the player phase is this one right here. At the end of your action phase, you may reveal a blue card from your hand. If you do, search your discard pile for an offensive card and shuffle it into your deck. A very nice way to get some powerful attack cards into your hand using this very cool item. Now, just for clarity, because I might have said moments ago we're done the player turn, we're actually not done the player turn just yet. So we did the consume, we did the monster upkeep, we went into the player turns. In other words, both of our hunters taking a turn one after the other. We've only done LJ so far. We've done the movement for LJ. We've done the action phase. We're now moving into the attrition phase. As you remember earlier on, I mentioned if we happen to have the weakened token because we decided to stay put in a position that we were currently already in at the beginning of our turn, then we'd be drawing 2 attrition cards off the top of the deck, increasing the odds that it could be higher than the number of defensive cards in our sequence. But when we don't have the weakened token, which we currently don't, which is awesome, we only draw 1 card. So let's see what we get. We got ourselves a 2, and we are lucky in that we have, and I shouldn't say lucky because I forcefully made sure I put defensive cards in here. We have 2 in here, so it equals this value, which means we'll have no attrition damage from the enemy. So in a hypothetical situation, let's say I only had 1 of the defensive cards in the sequence here and not 2. I'd only have 1, and the attrition would have been higher. If it's ever greater than what you have in here for defensive cards, you take your stance damage for the enemy, which is going to be 1 plus any other effects going on in gameplay that add to that, which Surge would give another +1 on top of it, so we take 2 damage, which would not be good. So thank goodness we had that covered. Now this card's only going to stick around until the end of this turn, meaning this LJ's player turn, which is coming up right away. So Surge will be discarded and a new card off the behavior deck coming in. Going into end of turn cleanup, we're now going to go ahead and discard the sequence for LJ, starting with the very first card played and working our way back to the last card played. So this one goes in the discard first, then this one here, and then this one here. So as you can see, if you actually stack them in the correct order, you might be able to get that yellow one on the very top. And that yellow one has a cool ability that if it's on the top, it can actually increase your damage, which is pretty nice. So again, there's lots of synergies and lots of strategy to playing cards for either current use or even future use down the road. Then we go ahead and draw our hand back up to a hand size limit of 5. So we're going to go ahead and draw a couple more here. We've got ourselves Shields Dance. We got ourselves Beyond Limits. Lots of red coming out. That's nice. And Counterattack. Now, based on the aggro token, the monster is going to turn to face the player with the aggro token, in this case, LJ. Our player turns are not over. We still have another hunter to go. Let's go ahead with Thoreg and see what we can pull off. Let's find out a bit more about what Thoreg is all about. This one here, we play a red card. It says place a counter on Skull Shock. Max 3 counters if there are already 3 counters on it. Then stun the monster and then remove all counters from it after the attack. So a nice little build up on that one. The Red Scale Helm here is an action. You can see this is the very first card that I have that actually has the action keyword. So I can do this during his turn if I wish. Discard the top card of your deck. If that card is a red, add it to your hand. You can max do this once per turn. Down below, Thunder Armor says when you empty your hand using all your cards, which is something that Thoreg likes to do, then you can deal 3 damage. Now, a quick correction I have to make is that one of the cards in my discard pile, we've already gone ahead and actually resolved. The one with the exclamation mark should not have been part of the behavior deck from the very beginning. It's the lightning card. It specifically states when doing the expedition mode to take this card and get it out of there. It'll be called upon later on. So, taking a look and reversing anything that happened on it, basically Ozew only gained 1 struggle from this. So we're going to reduce the amount of struggle that Ozew has from 3 down to 2. The bottom effect didn't trigger at all because I had the defensive cards to avoid the wounds, or I should say the damage. So it was pretty good that way. We can just take this out of the equation for now until called upon and just drop that struggle down by 1 and no gameplay impact going forward. Thoreg is not going to move during his turn, which means he's getting a threatened token, which I'm going to place on his dashboard. Going into the action phase for Thoreg, we're going to go ahead and use his Red Scale Helm. The action says discard the top card of your deck, and if the card's a red card, add it to your hand. Otherwise, it's just discarded. We got ourselves a yellow, so that is going to go right to the discard pile, unfortunately. Let's go ahead and start playing some cards for Thoreg. We're going to go ahead first and play this blue card here, an offensive card costing 0. Going to be completely ignoring what's going on here because I'm not using this card for a behavior card reveal. I'm using it simply to just build out a sequence. So 0 cost, and it's a stealth-based card. It's not affecting aggro in any way. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and spend, or I should say, play this card into my sequence. This one is going to cost 0 as I'm choosing X to be 0. In this case, I could choose it for its benefits here, but I'm not going to. It says you can only play this card after a blue one, so I've met that requirement. This is a red card, so it's going to do an attack, again based on the weapon, which I have here as 4, and aggro is involved. So the aggro token is moving over. 4 damage on top of the 4 we already have. It's a total of 8. We're working our way up to 14. So we have 8 damage now on the card, and we're working our way to 14. We also want to take a look at the behavior card, see if anything else triggers. We're going to have a trigger because we played a red card and resolved it. Let's go ahead and flip it. This one is called Thunder Strike. If the active player is in a marked sector, that player suffers damage unless they discard a random card from their hand. Guess what? I am on the flank, so I am good. There was no rampage icon, so we went right to replenishing and we're good to go. Now there's some new icons in here. What did these ones mean? These mean at the start of a hunter's turn, if they're in the front section, they're going to flip over. And currently we haven't been in the front section when any of these cards have been in play yet for either LJ or Thoreg. But we'll see how things go as we go along. I've been lucky enough to be positionally in the right spot to not have this one trigger from the past yet. And this one that just came in is going to make it even more fun when they both trigger in the future. We really are going to be in for some fun. Now, something else to keep your eye on is if you remember from my sequence I'm building out, I've got a blue and a red. Well, I'm working towards this right here to hit the horn. Let's get another red into play. Let's go ahead and build out that sequence to get that hit the horn objective card to trigger. That's going to be a blue and 2 reds. So we have a red first off, and this is a knockout. It says as long as we have a red before it, and when we place this card down, we can also stun the monster. So not only are we doing damage, we're also stunning the monster. Of course, it costs us 2. I'm going to go ahead and spend these 2 cards right now, throwing them in the discard in order to do so. Something I forgot the first time I placed a red card in my sequence was that when I do this, I can place a counter on this Skull Shock card. Once we have 3 of those counters on there, it's going to go ahead and dole out some pain. So that's pretty awesome. Again, another red card we're dealing with right now that I'm resolving adds another counter to that. Now we're up to a total of 12 damage, just 2 away from getting our very first wound. And there's 2 things that are happening at this point in time. One is actually attached to my character, so we're going to resolve that one right now as part of the attack. It states on the Thunder Armor, when you empty your hand, which it's currently empty, we deal an additional 3 damage. Out of 15 damage we have on the monster, 14 of it gets cashed in for a wound, so we drop the wound track by 1. We have 1 damage left over that stays here as we work our way back up to 14. As much as I would have loved to have gotten this objective on top of it, unfortunately just shy because I wasn't in the front sector when I made this attack. So because of that, the Inflict Blind is not going to trigger, even though I have blue, red, and red in a sequence currently. We're still resolving the red card as the next effect states that we can go ahead and stun the monster. This allows us to place a token on a behavior card. Knowing full well that I've run out of cards, and next up would be the flipping of this behavior card, the stun could not have come at a better time. So I obviously chose to place the stun token on the behavior card I knew would trigger next. That's going to prevent that card from triggering during this round. Next, I choose a player that reveals up to 2 red cards from their hand and deals their weapon damage to the monster for each card revealed this way. So I'm choosing to have LJ be the one that activates for this, and having 3 red cards in play at a maximum, I can reveal 2. So I'll reveal 2 cards, as you can see right here, and I get to do 2 separate attacks of 4 damage each going towards the monster. Now, something I just noticed, which I didn't trigger in the prior turn for LJ, which I'm certainly going to take advantage of right now, is the Gauntlet of Shellblade. This is a card that states when you avoid attrition damage, which we did with LJ in the previous turn, it says to add the top card of your discard pile to your hand. If that card is a red card, deal 3 damage. So we can absolutely do this retroactively without any further gameplay consequence. So we do have a red card on the very top of the discard pile, which is perfect. It goes into my hand for LJ. 3 additional damage should have been here already. I'm glad I remembered that because now we've got 12 up here. We are 2 away from the next wound. Action phase for Thoreg is done. We do not get a stamina token because we don't have 2 cards or more left over. So we skip past that. We head into the attrition phase. In this situation, Thoreg is threatened, has the threatened token, so we draw 2 attrition cards, and we take the worst. In this case, they're both the same anyway, but it's a 2, and I have absolutely no defense in my sequence. Thoreg takes a damage, and if you're wondering how much damage can one of these hunters sustain before they go down, well, the Red Scale Helm and the Thunder Armor together have a heart value in the bottom right-hand corner. That gives you your total health, which is 11, and as of right now, we only have 10 health remaining there. On the opposite side with LJ, currently still 11 health. Now at end of turn, I've gone ahead and discarded all the cards in my sequence in the order they were played into the discard pile, drawn up 5 cards because we didn't have any in hand. This is what I currently have to work with. The monster is now going to face the individual with the aggro token, and that is going to be Thoreg. If there are any end of turn abilities at this point, we go ahead and trigger them, but there are not. Both players have taken a turn during this round, so we go to end of round for the first time. Now, end of round abilities are going to trigger in a priority order. First peril, then any behaviors, then hunter cards, and then removing or flipping any red fire terrain that might be in play, removing any dust, vulnerable, or stun tokens, and then we advance the round marker. First thing we check is the peril cards. We do have one that says at the end of the round, it says each player in a marked sector suffers damage ×2 unless they reveal 2 green cards from their hand. And again, it's going to be based on this card right here, telling us which ones are marked. And as of right now, the only individual in a marked space is going to be Thoreg, thanks to him going ahead and smashing this individual as hard as possible, had this individual turn towards him. So does Thoreg have 2 green cards? I have 1. Do I have another one? No, I don't. So unfortunately, I will be taking the damage of 1, which is up here, ×2, which ends up being 2, going to Thoreg, which is not good, bringing up to a total of 3. Out of the 2 hunters going up against Ozew on this expedition, it looks like Thoreg is the one taking the beating currently. And right now we'll go ahead and remove the stun marker from the behavior card. And that, my friends, is going to end off round number 1 as we move to round number 2. As we head into round number 2, there was one thing I just noticed, and that is I should have placed a counter on the massive blow. When we stunned the monster at the tail end of Thoreg's last turn, we should have placed a counter on here. When we get the second one on here after stunning the monster a second time, we can flip this mastery over to the focus side. The starter round effect we'll resolve right off the hop here is the peril card one, revealing the top card of the Rumble deck, replacing the one that's currently here. So it was the front and back being marked for the creature we're going up against, and now it's going to be the left and right side. As we continue through the round structure of round 2, we're no longer going to talk about specifics that we've covered in the past. We're going to dive into the new stuff as we run into it. There's actually one thing I definitely want to mention to you guys around struggle tokens. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. But first off, it's the consume time frame. Neither one of my hunters are going to choose to consume at this moment. Into the monster upkeep phase, we take the lowest numbered card in the bottom left. It gets removed and discarded, and the next card off the deck comes into play. Now, for those wondering what this behavior icon means, essentially when someone becomes threatened because they decide to stand still, whether they already have the token or not, that behavior card will flip. The struggle tokens on the monster are now going to go from 2 to 4. Again, 1 struggle token per character. So the monster now has 4 struggle, and it's worth talking about it because we didn't cover this during round number 1. Struggle and unleash kind of get tied together in this step, in that what you're checking here is as the struggle tokens are being accumulated, either this monster, depending on its makeup of the behavior cards, will either be using struggle tokens when a behavior card is flipped in order to kind of boost that behavior card and make it more nightmarish for you, or in the case of this monster where we have not seen any boosting on the bottom of any behavior card we've flipped so far, instead an unleash will happen, which basically means the second that we hit 6 struggle, 3 per the number of characters is how you determine how much struggle before the unleash happens. So in my case, I have 2 characters, 3 struggle each, total of 6. Once I hit 6 or more, the unleash happens, and then we take damage equal to the stand. So this is just something that will just build up over time and consistently kind of kick us here and there. So depending on the monster you're going up against, these struggle tokens are going to be very dynamic and changing. In this case, we're going to be waiting and hoping they don't build up to 6 all too often. Now the hunter with the aggro token right here is going to take the first player token. Unfortunate for Thoreg, he's in the front sector of this monster, and so this is going to trigger right now. And it's called Calling the Storm. Ozew is going to gain struggle based on the number of characters, so 2 minus 1. So it'll be 1 struggle, and then the active player must recycle a red card. 1 extra struggle for the monster gives it a total of 5, 1 away from unleashing and doing some damage. But for right now, we're going to recycle one of the red cards in our hand. And it's honestly a pretty brutal decision because both these cards are amazing. This one's a great reactionary one where if another player plays 2 red cards in a sequence, which could certainly happen seeing as looking at the other character's hand has 4 red cards, then I can pull off another stun, which would then help me to get my mastery going on Thoreg. So this one is really worth keeping. This one over here, maybe not so much on the left, but it's still a great card. After recycling the heavy smash into the discard pile, we drew up an engage card. That's going to do it for this behavior card. We don't have any rampage stuff going on in terms of icons, so we're just going to go ahead and discard this and replenish. And unfortunately, we have one of the rampage icons getting into the behavior area here, which could certainly be a problem in the future. Now, what isn't a problem is starting off my turn in a sector where I can actually do some healing. Thanks to being in here, I can heal away 1 of the damage that I have. Let's have Thoreg move into the same sector as his friend LJ. He's going to discard this card for stamina in order to do it. And because we chose to move, we're actually discarding the threatened token, which was already on the character. Again, we didn't receive this token, so the behavior card way up there in the top left is not going to trigger. I'll choose to take the action off my red scale helm, hoping that I can get a red card off the top of my deck. If I do, I get to put it in my hand. If not, it goes to the discard pile. And it is Iron Blast. All right, I've got a plan. I'm not sure this is going to be a good one, but we'll see how it goes. We're going to go ahead with Iron Blast, a red card here, which is going to be the only card I'm playing because it costs so much. It costs 3 just to have it. We're going to go ahead and discard this card down here for 2 of the stamina required of the 3. We also need to discard 1 more. I've got a Step Back and I've got an Enrage. I think out of the 2, I'll hold on to the Enrage yellow and get rid of the green Step Back. Now I still have 2 cards in hand, a yellow card and a red card. Remember, the red one is what I'm holding on to because it could potentially pull off another stun if I can get LJ to do a lot of red cards going in a row, which I know I can pull off. But let's deal with the fact we place this in the sequence here. So it's going to be an attack. You can increase this damage, deals by 2 times the number of your weapon level. So in this case 1. So really just bumps it up by 2. And it has an opening keyword here. It says this attack inflicts vulnerable. So this Iron Blast red card is going to do 4 damage from the Skull Shock weapon that I have, plus an additional 2 for a total of 6 damage, getting us well over the 14 we need to inflict another wound. That was a solid shot, and also because we use the Skull Shock weapon, we get to place a counter on it, which is going to increase it to its maximum of 3. So the next time we use a red card using the Skull Shock weapon, we're going to be able to get rid of all the counters on that weapon and inflict stun. So as you can see down here, placing the red card as we did in here is going to trigger this, placing another counter on here. So we go from 2 to 3, which is awesome. We got to the maximum, and it says if there are already 3 counters on Skull Shock. So again, this is going to be triggering later on. We get the stun out of it. So pretty nice. We're ready to go on that front. And that stun could potentially be the thing that ends up getting us the 1 more we need in order to get our mastery up. We also have the backup plan of the red card over here to potentially use as a reactionary thing off of the other character to potentially get through this mastery as well. So a couple ways that can happen in the near future. Now the only thing that I haven't done at this point is placed any defensive cards in my sequence, so when we actually go to draw attrition, it's not going to be a good picture for me. I have 2 cards left in hand, and it's kind of brutal because I could go ahead and discard this red card in order to get a defense here in, which actually wouldn't be a bad idea, knowing full well that this Skull Shock in a future attack will get me to where I want to go with the stun, and all we have to do is stun the monster to get that to tick over. So we may not need to keep this card now, so maybe it's a good time to be smart and go ahead and get this Enrage card in play just to have some type of defense, knowing that we're not going to be in a bad space for attrition cards because we don't have the threatened token anymore. It's probably good on that front too. So let's go ahead and do it. We'll place that in here. We're going to pay with the 1 stamina for this. This is going to get discarded. It's actually a really great card, but we'll let it go to get that defense. This allows me to search my deck for a red card and add it to our hand and then reshuffle the deck. Of course, it has to come from the deck and not the discard pile. The card I chose is Frontal Assault. This will go into my hand. And it's worth mentioning, as much as I would love to say that I could go ahead and trigger the 3 damage because I emptied my hand for a split second during the resolution of this card, I do not in fact get it at this moment. I have to fully resolve the card, and if then I have nothing in my hand because I've emptied it, then I can get the 3 damage off this Thunder Armor. So I could choose to somehow use this, but currently don't have any way to do so and happy to just kind of hold on to it. And that's going to end it off. I don't get a stamina token because I have to keep 2 or more cards in hand, but that's going to do it for my character. It's now time for attrition. Off the top of the deck, we get ourselves a 1. Good thing because we have the 1 defense in here, so no attrition damage coming through. We're now at Thoreg's end of turn, so I've gone ahead and discarded all sequence cards in order played back to the discard pile, drawn up to 5 cards. Here are the 5 cards that I have in hand at this time. The monster certainly doesn't like the fact that we've come to the side of him, flanked him, and hit him, so he turns to face the aggro character. That'll do it for one hunter. Now it's time for LJ to take his turn. Now going into this, the only start a turn effect that I have for LJ is just the ability to heal, but he has no damage on him, so nothing there. I think for the movement side of the equation, I'm going to go ahead and burn my stamina token or to get the movement I need to head to the south position. This will in essence at the end of my turn give Thoreg a break in terms of being the target because this thing will flip around and come after me, being that I'm going to be throwing red cards maybe a little aggressively this turn. I'm going to start things off by playing this agility card. It's a defensive one. It's going to cost me 1 to do so. I'm going to choose to go ahead and use this one to pay for it, which will be perfect because it says if you paid with a blue card, draw 2. Awesome, so we got ourselves push and last breath added in. Let's go ahead and make some serious attacks. The first one I'm going to play is Beyond Limits. This one's going to cost nothing. It's also stealth, so we don't have to worry about moving the aggro token at this time. We have the ability to taunt with this if we wanted to. That's a keyword. You can actually check that up in the reference, but it basically allows you to discard the card in order to taunt the enemy away during the other character's or hunter's turn. Has benefits. Won't be applied in this situation, but it says here you may suffer 1 damage. If you do, increase the damage this attack deals by 2 and choose a player to draw 1. We're going to absolutely take that damage to do this. LJ takes a damage, and it's going to increase the amount of damage on his attack. The draw here is going towards Thoreg. This comes from his deck, of course. This actually takes the last card of his deck, so we're going to replenish it by reshuffling all his discarded action cards. So 4 damage coming from the card here, based on the Thunder Core plus the 2 because we took the damage, boosting it up to a total of 6. We have 4 already on the monsters. It's going to boost it up to 10, getting closer to 14 by the second. Let's keep it going. We're going to go ahead and use this one right here over here. This one is going to have the aggro token come over, so we'll move it over like so. This will be another 4 damage attack, and we are not going to go ahead and actually suffer any damage. If we do, though, we can choose a player to recycle up to 2 cards. I don't need to do this currently right now, I don't believe. On the other side, I'm pretty happy with what we have. So we're going to go ahead and add 4 damage into the fray, which on top of the 10 I have is going to be enough to move it up to the next wound. Now this is a major blow because, as you can tell right here, it states 7 health, stance 2. So at this point, we're now going to move from stance 1 of the enemy to stance 2. The enemy's going to get progressively harder as things go along. We now move into stance number 2, and as you can see, a couple things have changed. The toughness value has dropped, actually, in this case to 5, meaning that it takes 10 damage to actually get a wound now. It's a little bit easier, but it also states down here, when revealed, all players become dazed, so that's going to happen in a second. Then place the lightning card, which I pulled away earlier in the video, on top of the behavior deck. So I've gone ahead and placed that lightning card right on top of the behavior deck, and there is one thing I need to correct and mention. This is probably noticed earlier in the video, but I need to mention this now. There was at least one instance, maybe 2, of where I placed a blue card into my sequence, and a blue card is known as an offensive card, but unlike the red cards that will trigger an attack, the blue card will actually allow you to remove struggle tokens. So I missed out on potentially removing maybe 1 or at most 2 struggle tokens from past sequences. So I'm not going to retroactively go back and take these away, but it certainly would have slowed the progression towards 6. And so in this case, I'm actually making things a little bit difficult on myself, but I missed it. So if you miss it, I'm just going to continue rolling onwards, and the next time we play a blue card, we will remember this. That new stance for the monster has brought in dazed conditions for both of our characters, represented by the tokens you can see in their sequence areas. These are reminder tokens. The next time you play a maneuver card, which is the blue offensive card, in your sequence, you remove the token and ignore the card text. So basically, it's going to gum things up a little bit for you the next time you use one. Now, a final thing to mention and to wrap your head around with stance changes is that every monster is different. Their layout in terms of the peril cards that go with each stance change or the objectives are all going to be varied. So with this monster, from the very beginning in stance number 1, the previous card to this, we had these 2 come out based on the numbers right here for the peril cards and this objective. And these are all keyword permanent, meaning they are going to stick around for the entirety of the game. If that keyword was not there when you change from stance 1 to stance 2, then it wouldn't make any sense to keep these 1 cards sitting around. They would all be gone and there would be other cards to replace them. In this monster's case, because these are all permanent, there actually, for stance number 2, is no change to anything over here currently, but I can tell you there will be some changes going into stance 3, but it won't be taking away anything here as these remain for the entire game, as I mentioned. And on the right-hand side of the card, it also tells us we're going to stance 3 when we hit 3 on the wound track. Let's continue the pain train towards the monster. From LJ, he's going to go ahead and use Shield Strike. This will cost 1 stamina. We're going to discard this card from hand, which actually provides 2. The other stamina is lost. It's a very good card. Gives me resilience as a keyword. That has benefits. This one says deal damage to a monster equal to the damage you currently sustain. A great card in the right situation, but right now, a good one to pay for this one. We're going to go ahead. Aggro-wise, we're already with the aggro token. This is going to do 4 damage thanks to the weapon, the Thunder Core I have right here. And then on top of it, it's going to increase the damage based on the number of yellow cards in my discard pile, and I just put 1 in there, and there is currently a total of 3 inside that pile, so that means this thing is jumping up to 7 damage. That was a great amount of damage, but we're 3 away from getting a wound. Let's go ahead and play another card into the sequence. This is a Shield Dance. We're going to pay 1. It's going to have aggro again. Again, the token's already here. We're going to pay for this card by discarding this one here. This is going to go in the discard pile. This will go into our sequence, and it's going to dole out some damage. As you can see here, Shield Dance is actually a very cool card. Now, when your mastery's focused, you can ignore the actual cost of this card, so that's a nice little plus. Below it states if a yellow card comes before it, and then you place this red card after it, you can increase the damage by 3. A nice little boost. But for now, the 4 damage we get from this will be enough to get the wound we want with 1 left over. So we'll add 4 to the damage here. We'll take 10 away, leaving 1 remaining, and that's going to transfer over to a wound. Now, unfortunately, we weren't able to get any more counters on the Shield Master because we would have needed a yellow card before a red card, and I just didn't work towards that. I was more focused on just really creaming this monster with as many red cards as I possibly could because I had a really good setup here for LJ. But what is going to trigger right now, and it could be nasty, is going to be a dual card situation inside this behavior reaction because we've run out of cards with LJ, so this is going to flip over, and then once we actually flip over and resolve this, the Rampage here is going to go ahead and activate. This one is called Eye of the Storm. It says players in the marked sectors suffer damage and reduce their hand to 4, then reveal the top card of the Rumble deck. That card becomes the active Rumble card. So unfortunately, LJ is in the marked sectors on the flank of the enemy, so is going to be suffering some damage here. Taking a look at the stance card, it is going to be 1 damage coming to him. And a new Rumble card is drawn off the top of the deck, and now it is the front and back section that is marked. Rampage is going to trigger, which is going to have Chain Lightning flip over. The aggro player recycles a random card from their hand. Well, currently, I don't have any cards whatsoever. Then it says all other players must recycle a card of that same color from their hand. So in this situation, it was actually perfect that I burnt every single card in my hand because this Rampage doesn't have any effect. 2 more cards come into the slots, and the one with the exclamation mark gets resolved right away. And this is the lightning card that was placed on the top of the behavior deck when we went to stance number 2. This one is going to be giving the monster 1 struggle token, which is all it needs to be able to do its unleash attack. So it's going to do its damage to both of my characters or hunters. So an additional struggle token placed here would be the 6 needed to do the unleash. So these struggle tokens will be removed now as the unleash occurs, putting a damage on both of my hunters. So 1 here and 1 over here for the other characters. So now both of my characters have 3 damage, but things are not done just yet. On that card, it says the aggro player suffers damage again coming from the base of the stance card plus any extras around gameplay, unless they reveal a green card from their hand. I don't have any green cards in hand because I got so greedy with my attacks, so we have another damage coming in. This is so far a great example as to how the monster can just absolutely go off with its behavior cards. We've replenished the behavior card. We still have the one here where the threatened token gets placed, or if someone that already has a threatened token gets threatened, they're still going to flip this card anyway. I've been purposely avoiding that, so I've been moving my individuals every single turn to avoid this from triggering. This one's nasty because anytime we try to attack with a red card, it's going to flip, so that's not good. And this one we haven't seen yet, but that one is an easy resolve as well. Basically what that rotating arrow means is when the boss rotates to turn towards the aggro character at that point in time, this card will resolve. After all that insanity coming from the monster, we now go to the attrition. We're going to see how LJ stacks up there. We have 1 defensive card in here. We're only drawing 1 card because we're not threatened. Let's see how we do. We got a 1, so we're A-okay. We also don't want to forget about this, a wonderful benefit. When you avoid attrition damage, like we just did, add the top card of your discard pile to your hand. If that card is a red card, we get to deal 3 damage. And it appears to be our lucky day. We not only get to keep this card in our hand, we also deal out 3 more damage for a total of 4 now on the monster. I want to make mention of a very cool ability, which I haven't had the chance to use yet, but I just want to keep it top of mind for everybody watching. At the end of your action phase, you may reveal a blue card from your hand. If you do, search your discard pile for a offensive card and shuffle it into your deck. So this is a great way to get a card back that's an offensive one that you really want to see back a lot sooner. We're now ready to move into LJ's end of turn. After drawing up to 5, here's what I had prior going into the draw, and then I got these 4 cards right here. At this point, the monster is going to turn towards the aggro player, which is going to be LJ in the south sector. The monster shifts his focus, and the behavior card triggers Flying Assault. The active player reveals a random card from their hand. If that card is a defensive card, they discard it. Otherwise, that player suffers damage. Now looking at my hand of cards, the odds aren't so great. We have 3 cards that are offensive and 2 cards that are defensive. Go ahead and do a shuffle here real quick and we'll see which one ends up being chosen because it has to be random. So I'm just shuffling these up and we'll go ahead and split the deck in half and we will draw the middle one here in the center and we got ourselves an offensive card. And that doesn't bode well for our active player, which now jumps from 4 damage up to 5. The more LJ's turn continues, the more damage he seems to take. Even though we got a ton of attacks out, he's also taking quite a bit of hits. And the behavior card up here is replenished with one which will activate when a character or hunter starts their turn in the front sector. That's going to truly end off LJ's turn. He's breathing a sigh of relief right now, but unfortunately we now move to the end of round, which also doesn't have good things coming to us because that's going to trigger this one right here. Each player in the marked sector suffers damage ×2 unless they reveal 2 green cards from their hand. And currently the front sector and the back sector or rear sector are the marked ones. And unfortunately that yet again puts LJ in a bad situation. He has 1 green card and he doesn't have enough to stop this, which means 2 more damage is coming his way. Now, it's worth mentioning on the cards themselves, not only the other character or hunter you're controlling, but also the one you're currently actively controlling will have specific bolded words that will tell you you can use these cards in certain situations that could potentially help you. Now, you'll have to weigh whether they're the right time frames to do it. Like this one here, anticipate when you would suffer some damage from a behavior card effect, you could potentially use this card in order to negate that. You'll have to make those decisions as to when it's worth it to do it versus when it's worth it to use the card for something else you might be working towards. That's the fun and the strategy of the game, is that these cards have multiple uses and multiple ways that can be employed in gameplay. And that, my friends, wraps up another round of play. We now move the round marker down to the 3rd position, and as of right now, we placed 4 wounds out of 10 on the monster. And I think this is a perfect spot to stop as we dive into the finale in the upcoming episode, as we are just about halfway through the health of this monster. We still have a lot of time, so in terms of the loss conditions, we're doing really well on the round side of the equation, but we need to be careful, as if we get too much damage too quickly, we could get into a really bad situation with our hunters. Now, I still have the ability to do some healing through some of the potions by consuming going into the next round, which I'm certainly going to be thinking about, being that the attrition value on the top of the discard pile is currently 1, which makes using this potion right here for LJ very valuable. I could potentially heal 4 right now. Maybe over here I'll wait until I actually have 4 damage to make most use of the potion on the other side. But you want to keep those things in mind, as well as the fact we can also go ahead and heal off some of the environment effects going out there. We also have the rocks we can potentially use to avoid some damage in the future. So many other things we're going to probably need to utilize to take down this monster. I'm having an absolute blast so far with this playthrough, just like I did with the prototype many moons ago. It's great to see this in its final version. It looks so much better, and it plays absolutely awesome. If you're looking for a boss battler, this is one of the best out there by far. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below, and stay tuned for the finale in the very near future. And as always, keep on rolling solo.